They thought he was just another old man sitting alone holding a faded ID card from a century ago. Could this forgotten veteran hold a secret that would stun a nation? He wasn't on the guest list, he wasn't in their database, so they told him, "Sir, this event is for VIPs only." But when the helicopters landed and the nation's most elite soldiers stepped onto the field, they didn't walk toward the generals, they walked toward him, and then the 4-star general saluted and the whole ceremony stopped. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning air at Westbrook Military Academy carried a quiet gravity. Nestled in the green hills of Northern Virginia, the academy had stood for a century, its stone towers and brass plaques whispering stories of valor, discipline, and sacrifice. On this day, it was dressed for celebration, the centennial ceremony. 100 years of training, soldiers, leaders, legends, banners hung from iron lampposts, crisp blue and gold. The main quad had been transformed overnight, folding chairs in perfect rows, polished stage in front of the grand chapel steps, and a full honor guard rehearsing their formations in silence. It was the kind of morning where even the wind felt ceremonial. Cadets in pressed uniforms moved briskly through the crowd, escorting dignitaries, checking logistics, nodding to generals and retired officers arriving in chauffeured cars. Everything was on schedule, everything was under control until the old man arrived. He came not by car, but on foot along the cobblestone path that led from the north gate, where the statues of the academy's founders cast long, watching shadows. He wore a long faded coat, gray once, maybe olive drab decades ago. The shoulders were worn thin, a wooden cane tapped steadily as he walked, not for show, but necessity. His back was slightly hunched and his breath visible in the morning chill, but he walked tall in spirit. There was a stillness to him, the kind that made time slow. Across his chest, clipped loosely to a fraying lanyard, hung an old ID badge. It was cracked at the corners, the photograph long faded, just a young man in a cadet cap with the words Westbrook Military Academy typed underneath in black ink. Joseph Grant, class of 44. He reached the outer cordon where 2 junior officers were stationed, lieutenants, barely 30, hands crossed at their belts, earpieces clipped to their collars. The taller one stepped forward, polite, professional. "Good morning, sir, may I see your credentials?" Joseph held out the badge, not with entitlement, but with quiet trust. The lieutenant glanced at it, then blinked. Sir, this ID is not scannable. Do you have a QR registration or printed confirmation for the event?" Joseph shook his head. "No, I was just hoping to attend. I trained here a long time ago." The second lieutenant stepped forward now, scanning a tablet. "What's the name, sir?" Joseph Grant. Fingers tapped quickly, scrolled, search, frown. "Not on the guest list." Joseph nodded slowly, eyes drifting past them to the stage in the distance. "I don't need a seat, I just wanted to watch." The 2 officers exchanged a glance. The taller one leaned in, keeping his voice even. "I'm sorry, sir, this event is closed to registered guests and VIPs. If your name's not listed, we can't let you through the perimeter." Joseph gave a soft chuckle. "I suppose I've lived too long for the system to remember me." The younger one tried to smile. "It's not that, sir, we just have strict security protocols." Joseph looked down for a moment, then tucked the old badge back into his coat pocket. "I understand you're doing your job." But there was something in the way he said it, not anger, not sarcasm, just resignation, the older kind, the kind that knows what it feels like to be forgotten. Could this rejection reveal a hidden hero? He turned slowly, tapping his cane as he began walking away. The taller lieutenant watched him go, lips tightening. Something about the man tugged at his gut, but orders were orders, protocol was protocol, and this was not just any ceremony, it was being broadcast live, attended by generals, senators, and even a cabinet official. No room for unverified guests. Joseph circled around the outer courtyard, walking farther than he probably should have, past the oak trees, past the old fencing range where he once trained with real sabers and bayonets. There, behind the last row of folding chairs, was an empty spot, grass still wet with dew, no flag, no spotlight, just space. He eased himself onto the edge of a low stone planter and sat, setting the cane beside him, rubbing his knee with practiced fingers. The academy had changed, but he hadn't come for nostalgia. He just wanted to see it one more time, to hear the hymns, to watch the cadets march, to remember. He pulled the old ID from his pocket and turned it over in his hands. The lamination had peeled back, the photo was nearly invisible, but he remembered every detail. He remembered the smell of gun oil and chalk, the sound of steel heels on concrete, the way the drill instructor barked his name. That first week, he remembered every man he trained with. Not all of them made it back. A voice came over the loudspeaker, breaking the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Westbrook Centennial Ceremony. Please rise for the presentation of colors." Joseph stood slowly, unsteady but upright, as the flag emerged, carried by crisp uniform cadets. He brought his hand to his brow in a slow, precise salute. His arm trembled slightly, but the salute did not falter. No one around him noticed. The cameras were pointed the other way. The audience was focused on the grand entrance where politicians shook hands and brass glinted under morning sun, but Joseph stood all the same, alone at the edge of the celebration, unseen for now, because what no one knew was that history was sitting right there, watching them, waiting to be remembered, and before this day was done, it would be. The anthem faded into silence, the brass band lowering their instruments with practiced precision. On the main stage, rows of dignitaries took their seats, generals in full dress, senators with shiny lapel pins. Westbrook's current superintendent, Major General Thomas Reed, stepped to the podium. His posture was straight, his voice firm. Today, we gather to honor a century of tradition, a 100-years of discipline, courage, and legacy. The crowd applauded, cameras clicked, but none of it reached the far edge of the quad where Joseph Grant sat alone on a stone planter nearly 50 yards from the ceremony, far from the seating chart, far from the applause. He shifted his cane and exhaled slowly, watching his breath curl in the morning air. His back ached, his knees had long since stiffened, but that wasn't what made him wince. It was the quiet truth setting in. They had no idea who he was and they didn't care. He tried once, just once, to explain. About an hour earlier, before the cordon was fully locked down, Joseph had approached one of the registration tables on the east side of the parade grounds. The cadets manning the table were sharp, squared away, barely out of high school, but crisp in their demeanor. Joseph had smiled gently. "Excuse me, son, I was hoping to check in. I'm from Class 0. The cadet furrowed his brow. "Sir, we started our records from Class 1. 1924, Joseph chuckled. "That's because Class 0 was a pilot program, 14 of us housed in the West Barracks. We used canvas cots and trained with bolt-action rifles." The cadet blinked. "Do you have a QR code?" Joseph pulled out his old badge again. "This is all I've got." By now, a supervising officer, Captain Landon, had noticed the conversation and stepped over. "Is there a problem here?" The cadet gestured toward the ID. "He's not in the registry, sir." Joseph turned to the captain. "I was here when those towers were first built. I helped dig trenches behind the mess hall. Later, I served 2 tours in Korea, then came back to train the Academy's first recon platoon in the 60s. We called it Project Spectre back then. We laid the groundwork for today's Special Ops curriculum." Captain Landon raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, trying to stay cordial, "but none of that matches our official history. We'd have documentation." Joseph nodded slowly. "It was classified." The captain offered a tight smile, the kind people use when they've already stopped listening. "With respect, sir, if you don't have proper credentials, we can't allow access beyond the public walkways. It's a security issue." Another young officer leaned over and whispered, not so quietly, "Maybe someone's grandfather got confused again." Joseph heard it. He always did. Still, he straightened his coat, tipped his head politely, and backed away. There was no anger in his steps, just the quiet weight of being erased. Could this overlooked past change the course of the ceremony? So he had walked slowly around the perimeter, past statues he remembered watching be hoisted into place, past plaques engraved with dates he lived through, past young men and women in uniform saluting the flag, unaware they were walking on ground he helped shape. He found his spot beyond the cordon and sat again just to see it one more time. She saw him from the second row. Cadet Lieutenant Emily Rodas, third-year honors, top of her class in field tactics, and already shortlisted for Ranger School. She wasn't distracted, she just had a sharp eye for detail. While others focused on the stage, she noticed the old man sitting alone by the hedges just beyond the official viewing area. He hadn't moved much, but he was watching everything. Something about him felt off, not in a dangerous way, in a forgotten way. She watched him rise once, salute the colors during the anthem, then sit back down slowly, favoring his knee. Something about the way he moved, the way he stood, precise, respectful. She recognized it. That wasn't the movement of a confused old man, that was the muscle memory of someone who had drilled salutes into his bones. Emily stepped away from her row and approached her squad leader, a young captain from the Reserve Officer Corps. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice low, "there's an elderly man seated by the rear hedges. He's not on the guest list, but I believe he may be prior service, possibly a veteran." The officer barely glanced over. "Lots of old vets here today." "He's not sitting in the designated seating, no escort, no ID badge." "Then he's not cleared to stay focused on the ceremony." Cadet Emily hesitated. "Sir, I think he may have been part of the early training program. He has an old academy badge, worn uniform markings. It could be important." The captain, "We've got generals in the front row, senators, even the Secretary of the Army's liaison team. You want me to investigate a guy sitting on a flower box in the cold?" Emily didn't flinch. "Yes, sir, I do." The captain narrowed his eyes, annoyed. "I'll make a note, but don't cause a scene. We don't need distractions today." "Dismissed." Emily nodded, but she didn't sit down, not yet. Instead, she looked back across the quad and watched the old man sit quietly, hands folded over a wooden cane, eyes fixed on a podium where his name was never going to be spoken, and something inside her didn't sit right, not with how proud he looked, not with how alone he sat, because somewhere in her gut, she knew that man hadn't come to be seen. He'd come because he remembered, and sooner or later, someone else needed to remember him. 2. Could one cadet's instinct rewrite history? The sound came low at first, a dull thrum in the distance, then it grew rising, sharp, rhythmic. Rotors' heads turned toward the sky as the faint outline of a military helicopter appeared beyond the tree-line, slicing through the cold Virginia air. Not part of the schedule, not on the program, not expected. The band stopped, the crowd hushed, and every camera on the quad slowly swiveled upward. As the Blackhawk approached, the Westbrook emblem emblazoned on its side came into view alongside markings that drew a murmur from a few in the know: Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Delta Force, elite units. The best of the best. The helicopter touched down in the north field with surgical precision, its landing gear sinking slightly into the grass. Within seconds, the side doors slid open. Out they came, 12 in all, full gear, dress blacks, shoulder patches from every special operations unit in the armed forces. They moved in formation, silent, measured, exact, like ghosts returning home. The MC at the podium stammered over the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. This appears to be a scheduled demonstration by our distinguished alumni." But no one moved, no one blinked. Because this wasn't a demonstration, it was a reckoning. At the front of the formation walked a man whose presence eclipsed every general on that stage. Tall, broad, gray-haired. Beneath his officer's cap, a 4-star insignia gleamed on each shoulder. General Marcus Leland, commander of Joint Special Operations Command. One of the most decorated living officers in American military history. He didn't head toward the stage, he didn't shake hands with the secretary's liaison, he didn't acknowledge the seated generals or the superintendent. He walked straight through the center aisle between frozen cadets and bewildered guests toward the far edge of the quad, toward a lone man sitting on a stone planter, Joseph Grant. The old man rose slowly, using his cane for balance. His face betrayed no surprise, just calm acceptance. Like a man who knew this moment didn't belong to him, it belonged to the memory of everything that came before. The moment the general reached him, he stopped, paused, and then in front of the entire academy, he raised his right hand and delivered a crisp formal salute. For several seconds, the world stopped breathing. Behind him, the entire Special Operations formation stood tall, then followed suit. 12 salutes, 12 warriors standing at full attention, facing one old man. Joseph slowly returned the gesture, his hand trembling slightly, his fingers curling stiffly from decades of arthritis. But the salute was perfect because muscle memory doesn't forget honor, and neither did they. General Leland turned to the audience, his voice carrying not loud, but weighted with authority that needed no microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you've been hearing stories today about Westbrook's legacy, about its founders, about its traditions." He glanced toward the dignitaries, "but none of that would exist for us if not for this man." He turned back to Joseph. "This is Colonel Joseph Grant, United States Army. Retired." A stir rippled through the crowd, not applause, not yet, just realization. General Leland continued, "He was here before any of us, Class 0. A founding cadet before the academy even had running water." He let the words sink in. He returned after his third deployment in Korea and helped establish Westbrook's first covert tactics program. What was once called Spectre Company is now the modern foundation for every special operations training unit this academy produces. Silence absolute. And in 1971, Leland went on during a failed reconnaissance mission along the Cambodian border. A young intel team mine was trapped behind enemy lines, communications were down, support was unreachable. He looked directly at Joseph. "Colonel Grant led a 3-man rescue through 17 kilometers of jungle under direct fire, no orders, no backup, just grit, silence, and purpose." Joseph didn't nod, didn't flinch, he simply stared back, steady. "3 of us made it home, I was one of them." Leland's voice caught for just a second, but he recovered. "We were 22, he was 50. He turned again to the cadets, the guests, the stunned officers who moments ago didn't know Joseph Grant's name. "You're here today because men like him came before you, because when others wrote the manuals, he walked them out in the field. When others gave speeches, he gave blood." Leland stepped aside. "I came here to speak at this podium, but I'm no longer the one with anything to say." He looked to Joseph. "This day belongs to you, sir." And then he stepped back, the whole formation did, leaving Joseph standing in the center of the quad, facing 1,000 faces. No one moved, even the flag overhead just for a moment hung perfectly still. Joseph looked around, took in the place, then said softly, "I didn't come here to be seen." A long pause. "But I thank you for remembering." The silence didn't last, it shifted, softened, turned into something else. Reverence across the quad. Cadets slowly rose to their feet, not because of an order, but because of something deeper, something felt. One by one, they bowed their heads, some placed their hands over their hearts, some saluted, and some simply stood very still, letting the weight of the moment settle into their bones. Could this salute ignite a legacy? Among them, the young officers who had turned Joseph away earlier now pushed through the gathering crowd, faces pale, eyes wide. They reached him quietly, no ceremony, no microphone, just 2 young men standing in front of the man they dismissed. The taller one spoke first, his voice was unsteady. "Sir, we're sorry, truly." The other nodded, eyes locked on the ground. We didn't know. Joseph looked at them, really looked, and then he nodded once, a small gesture, but enough, no anger, no lecture, only grace. That was all the response they deserved, and far more than they'd earned. The superintendent stepped forward next, clearing his throat, trying to gather what little control the moment would allow. He took the microphone with both hands. Cadets, guests, members of the armed services. He paused, glanced back toward Joseph, then tried again. Today, we were reminded that history doesn't always wear a name tag, that some legacies come without a headline, without a banner, but leave deeper footprints than any parade ever could. He gestured toward the flagpole where a new banner was being quietly unfurled by two staff cadets, a rich navy blue, gold-stitched lettering, the Joseph Grant Training Center S 2024. A murmur rolled through the audience, then applause, slow at first, then rising, rippling, until the entire quad echoed with it. Joseph didn't clap, he just smiled, a quiet, tired, knowing kind of smile, the kind a man gives when he's not seeking anything, only seeing it come full circle. Emily Rodas, still in her cadet uniform, stepped gently beside him. Sir, she said softly, may I escort you? He looked at her, eyes warm, a touch of amusement behind them. You're the one who saw me first, aren't you? She nodded, a little embarrassed. I thought something didn't feel right. He tapped his cane, shifted his weight. You trusted your gut, that's something they won't teach you in doctrine. She smiled, then offered her arm. Joseph took it and together they walked slowly through the parted sea of cadets and officers, past the folding chairs, past the high brass, past the past itself, to a front row seat marked with a simple wooden plaque reserved Colonel J. Grant, Class 0. The ceremony continued, but the tone had changed. The general spoke, the bands played, but the heartbeat of the event had already happened. It sat in a quiet row near the front, and an old man with a cane and a cadet who'd remembered to look deeper as the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the field. The camera crews panned wide for the closing salute and caught just a glimpse of something in the corner of the screen, a cane resting across one knee, a cadet standing beside him, hand on her heart, and a generation watching, learning. Years later, the footage would resurface in a documentary. His name would be carved in stone near the parade ground. Westbrook cadets would pass under the archway of the Joseph Grant Center every day. Most would not know the full story, but one would. Colonel Emily Rodas, now an instructor herself, decorated, respected, she would stand at the edge of the same field where Joseph once sat and speak to her new cadets, voice quiet under the wind. You'll hear a lot about leadership in your time here, she'd say, about strength, about courage, about victory. She'd pause, let the silence settle, but I was there the day Colonel Grant was recognized, and I can tell you what I saw wasn't power, it wasn't command, it was dignity carried quietly, worn like a uniform no one else could see. She'd glance toward the plaque, now polished with time. I used to think I understood what honor meant, she'd say, but it wasn't until that day watching him that I learned the truth. Her voice would drop almost to a whisper. Honor doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention, it just stands there steady until the world remembers. And just like that, a story passed down from a man who never asked to be seen to a woman who made sure he never faded again, because in the end, some legacies don't need a microphone, they only need one moment to be seen. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.